Zorana, you're an expert on emotions, you study emotions, and you make an underlying assumption that there is consciousness, and therefore emotion is a product of the consciousness, and therefore you're going to study the emotions. And that's entirely logical and rational. What I want to try to do is to do the reverse and start with emotion in a de novo sense and see, is there anything we can infer then about consciousness? So how could you begin to address that? Knowing what you know about emotion and its deep interrelationships and characteristics and descriptions, and what that might mean about the nature of consciousness.
I do not study consciousness per se, so I'm not a neuroscientist, and I do not study how neural impulses and chemical processes translate into our conscious experience. However, my research...
Neuroscientists don't understand that either, but that's a separate
I know they
point.
do, but that's their aspiration.
Yeah.
In science, we build to ideals. My research focuses on emotion, and although I don't study consciousness per se, emotions are a property of consciousness. Yes. And so when I'm thinking, what can we learn about consciousness from the study of emotions? Well, I'm a scientist, I start with definition. So what are emotions? So emotions are immediate reactions to something that happens either in our environment or in our minds. And they result in a number of changes. First kind of change is changes in our thinking. Do we like something? Are we attracted to something? What are expectations about it? Another kind of changes are physiological. There may be levels of heart rate that are increased. Our respiration may change. The third kind of change is expressive. Our body posture can be influenced by what we are feeling, and our facial expressions can change. And the final one is our behavior, our actions. Are we approaching something? Are we recoiling? What are we doing in response to an event that triggers emotions? So when we are talking about emotions in terms of consciousness, we can ask a fundamental question of what is the experience of experiencing emotions? Because if consciousness is defined as awareness of internal and external events, then we might try to understand what that emotional property of that consciousness or
what is it that could have as a property emotion?
Exactly.
That's another way to put it, yeah.
Exactly. So what are we experiencing when we are experiencing emotions? Well, we can ask people, and we often ask people what they are experiencing. It turns out that's a very difficult question. People tend to give answers that are very general when asked the question what they are experiencing. And it becomes perplexing or confusing. How do you put it into words? You know you are having an experience, you are feeling it, but describing it can be challenging. We can help people, and there are ways of educating people about different components or dimensions of emotions. So we can take the emotional experience apart and say that it has an aspect of what we call valence, how pleasant or unpleasant it is. And we can tell very easily how pleasant or unpleasant it is. There's also an aspect that is about activation, bodily activation or arousal in the body. We can usually tell how much of activation we have in our experience. But that doesn't fully explain that subjective aspect of what a feeling is. So we get only partly there. Another very tricky aspect of emotions that is very relevant in understanding consciousness is sort of a Schrodinger's cat effect of emotions. And that is in some ways very practical. And what the effect is that once we try to label our feeling, its nature changes. And that is very practical because just the act of labeling our emotions precisely, not just saying I'm feeling stressed, because that is a catch-all term, not just saying I'm feeling happy, but identifying the specific nature of that positive experience. Saying that you are feeling hopeful, or that you are feeling amused, or that you are feeling optimistic, gives it a richer description and more specific description. When we are labeling the emotions themselves, their properties really change. And that can be useful in terms of experiencing negative emotions that you want to be regulating or managing better. So the act of labeling that you're feeling anxious at this time can ease the tension and can make you better able to cope with that experience of anxiety.
Yeah. From that perspective, when you then feed it back to understanding what is this entity that enables this to happen, in which there are at least, two orders or maybe more. The first order being feeling the emotion, the second order being sensing yourself having the emotion and labeling it, and then it changes. So there are different levels, and this entity of consciousness is able to do that. And maybe we can't go further than that, but that is property information about what is the entity that has to carry those properties.
Exactly. And the phenomenon of different layers of experience in relation to emotion, you can look at it from a different perspective too. We oftentimes have feelings, emotional experiences, as we are working on something. And if I'm working on, I'm a scientist, I do a lot of writing. If I am writing an article, and if you interrupt me and ask me what is going on in my mind, what is the content of my consciousness, my first reaction would be to tell you about the content of what I'm writing, of what I'm focusing on while putting those words on a page. What ideas are flowing, in what ways am I going back and forth with different ideas. However, there is a different layer of experience that we might not be fully consciously aware of at any particular time, but still can exert influence. So maybe my writing is not flowing seamlessly, and there's a level of tension that I'm experiencing. I might not be consciously aware of it at every time, at every moment in time, or in that moment when you ask me what is the content of your consciousness, but it's still exerting influence of creating that tension and influencing the sense of pressure in the writing process.